In March 2024, a young man is out and about in Bristol. It's actually a perfectly normal evening in the life of a student. A few drinks with friends, followed by a house party at a friend's house. But the evening will end with a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Because Jack O'Sullivan disappears on his way home. And although his route is recorded quite accurately by surveillance cameras, it is still not known what happened to the young man. And whether his disappearance was the result of a tragic accident or perhaps a crime. Jack O'Sullivan is 23 years old. He graduated from the University of Exeter and then moved back in with his parents. They live not far from Bristol, where Jack is taking a few law courses after graduating. Bristol is located on the west coast of England, about a 3-hour drive from London. On the evening of March 2nd, Jack was out with a few friends. The group has settled into the Wetherspoons in the center of Bristol. Wetherspoons is a British pub chain and a popular place for many people to stop for a drink or two. After a few drinks at Wetherspoons, the group moves on to a house party. This also takes place in Bristol, on Hotwell Road. Jack has only known the people he is with this evening for a short time. He is therefore unsure beforehand whether he should go at all. But his mother, Catherine, encourages him to do so. He is sure that spending time with his new friends will do him good. So Jack follows his mother's advice and spends the evening at a birthday party on Hotwell Road. Although Jack is of legal age, he still keeps his parents informed when he goes out. This evening is no exception. Jack's mother, Catherine, sends him a text message around 1 a.m., asking if she or Jack's father should pick him up from Bristol by car. At 1:52 a.m., Jack texts his parents to say that he's okay and that he'll organize a taxi to get back home soon. His parents can go to bed and not have to wait up. Jack doesn't live in Bristol itself, but a little way out in Flexburton in the county of Somerset. He took the bus to Bristol in the afternoon, but public transport stops running in the middle of the night. So Jack's only option is a taxi. Jack's parents go to bed feeling reassured that Jack is going to get a taxi. Jack doesn't leave the house party until about an hour after he texts his parents. He leaves the party alone and is recorded on a security camera on his way home. He walks along Christina Terrace and is then filmed again at 2:57 a.m. at Junction Springbridge. This route leads towards a main road. Jack probably assumes that he is most likely to get a taxi there. He does have an Uber account, but does not log in that night. At 3:13 a.m., Jack crosses the Brunel Way overpass after apparently walking along Brunel Rock Road. This route also takes him past the edge of Camberland Basin. This is the harbor basin and quasi the entrance to the docks of Bristol. 7 minutes later, at 3:24 a.m., Jack tries to call a buddy of his. The buddy is still at the party but doesn't answer. It's not entirely clear exactly where Jack is making the call from. A few minutes later, the buddy sees that Jack called him and calls him back. At 3:30 a.m., he dials Jack's number and the 23-year-old picks up. However, Jack only says hello. Then the call breaks down. Why? No one knows. It was also never possible to find out why Jack called his friend at all. At 3:38 a.m., there is another interesting surveillance camera recording. This is 8 minutes after the call with Jack's friend was interrupted. However, only a silhouette can be seen in this recording. Based on the gait and stature, Jack's parents are absolutely certain that the person on the video is their son. The person is walking over the Plimsoll Swing Bridge. At 3:40 a.m., a security camera presumably records Jack walking up Bennett Way. Then his trail goes cold. And since that moment, Jack O'Sullivan has been missing. When Jack's parents realize early in the morning that their son has not come home as planned, they immediately become uneasy. At the same time, Jack's mother, Catherine, has a glimmer of hope. Before Jack left the house the afternoon before, he proudly showed her his new Apple AirTag. This is a small tracking device that you can put in your pocket, or, like Jack, you can attach it to your keys. If you lose your valuables, you can use it to locate them. This is exactly what Catherine O'Sullivan tells the police when she reports Jack missing that day. Jack left the house with the AirTag, so it should be easy to locate him using the Apple service. However, Catherine's hopes are dashed immediately at the police station. She is told that Apple's privacy policy would not allow the AirTag data to be tracked. This seems nonsensical to the O'Sullivans, especially as Jack remains missing for days and even weeks. During a further conversation with the police, the investigators suggest that they have now tried to evaluate the AirTag. However, without success. The battery of the tracking device was apparently empty. Catherine replies that this could hardly be the case. At 6 p.m., Jack had shown her how the AirTag worked. Catherine also says that she's been in touch with Apple's customer service. They told her that the AirTag would show the last location even if the battery was empty. I don't have an AirTag myself, but if you do, please feel free to share your experiences with it in the comments, including how the battery life is. Catherine always brings up the AirTag with the police. At some point, the police changed their story and said that something must have been wrong with the settings, and that's why it couldn't be located. The police are said to have last told Catherine that the AirTag was not registered to Jack, but to his ex-girlfriend. That is why they were unable to access the data. However, Jack's ex-girlfriend denies ever having anything to do with an AirTag, let alone that Jack would ever carry something with him that she had registered. The fact is that the AirTag data has not been accessed to date, even though it could play an important role in the investigation. Jack's route is well documented by the surveillance cameras, but after the recording at 3:40 a.m., he is nowhere to be found. Catherine O'Sullivan is very critical of the police, if only because of the AirTag issue. She finds it completely incomprehensible that the data could not or should not be read for some reason. On top of that, the police initially overlooked the video recordings from the Plimsoll swing bridge. Catherine is sure that her son can be seen on them. However, she found these recordings herself and later submitted them to the police. Without her initiative, the police would have missed a possible piece of Jack's last journey. And it is precisely this recording that changes a few things. Because just because Jack can probably be seen on the recordings at the Plimsoll swing bridge, the recordings from nearby Bennett Way also turn up. If Catherine had not found these recordings of Plimsoll swing bridge, Jack's last sign of life would be missing. Without these two sightings, the last video recording of Jack would be at 3:13 a.m. near the harbor bench. And that is an important point in this case, because the police tell Catherine shortly after Jack's disappearance. The investigators suspect that Jack fell into the harbor at night and drowned. This assumption is tragic, but not unlikely, especially if you assume that the sighting near the harbor basin is the last shot. But if you take into account the two video recordings that Catherine found on her own weeks later, Jack's entire route changes. Because if Catherine is right, and it really is Jack that can be seen on them, then he is last seen moving towards the city and thus away from the water. This would make the police theory that Jack drowned less likely.
I can see Jack on that last piece of footage. I can see him walking in a straight line with purpose. And then he's not there anymore. And I can also see so many vehicles driving past. And for me, I can't understand how somebody hasn't seen something.
Another glimmer of hope is the Find My Friends app, which Jack has installed on his phone. The app allows you to share your location with selected people. And Jack's location was still visible beyond his last sighting. When Catherine O'Sullivan looked at her phone in the morning of March 3rd, She could see that Jack's location was being shared via Find My Friends. So they know that Jack was at an address on Granby Hill between 5:40 and 6:44 a.m. This address is very close to the house where Jack was at the party earlier. But it is not the same address. It is in the extended neighborhood. When Catherine sees Jack's GPS status, she tries to call him several times. She gets a dial tone, but Jack doesn't answer. She also sends him a WhatsApp message asking where he is. The message has 2 gray ticks, indicating that it was at least delivered. But Catherine doesn't receive a reply, and at 6:44 a.m., Jack's iPhone loses its connection to Find My Friends. The address where the cell phone was presumably located is visited once by the police. Nothing more is known, except that the police do not return to the scene after this first visit. It seems as if the address is not necessarily connected to Jack's disappearance. His cell phone was never found. Some suspect that it was not Jack who was in Granby Hill, but only his cell phone. Maybe his iPhone was stolen during the night. But that also raises further questions. Where, when, and from whom could his cell phone have been stolen? At 3:30 a.m., he accepted a call from his buddy, but the conversation ended immediately after the greeting. On camera footage showing Jack 10 minutes later, he does not appear to be running away from or being followed by someone, for example. What happened to Jack after 3:40 a.m.? And where has his cell phone been since then? If it was really him who was in Granby Hill that early morning, why did he go back to the area from which he originally set out? Not only is there still no trace of Jack, but also of his personal belongings. For one thing, his cell phone is still missing. A black iPhone 11 in a red case, as is his Apple AirTag in a brown case. Jack's debit card, driver's license, card holder, house, and car keys were also never found. Neither the debit card nor Jack's cell phone were used after his disappearance. His Emporio Armani watch with a blue dial has also not been found to date. His green Barber jacket, an off-white knit sweater, chinos, and brown leather sneakers from Ralph Lauren were not discovered during any of the searches that were carried out. And that despite 40 search operations and 16 drone flights, and more than 100 witness statements being evaluated. More than 100 hours of surveillance camera footage was viewed, and a total of more than 200 hours were spent searching for Jack O'Sullivan between Bristol and Flexburton. In vain. The 23-year-old has been missing since the early morning of March 3, 2024. The police are said to have hinted to Catherine that they assume that Jack might have fallen and drowned somewhere near the water. However, this becomes a little less plausible when you consider the last camera footage of Jack walking back towards the center of Bristol. And it would also not explain the cell phone signal from Granby Hill, which lasted until 6:44 a.m. Whoever had Jack's cell phone during this time ignored calls and messages from Catherine O'Sullivan during this period. This would actually tend to suggest that it was not Jack who was on Granby Hill from 5:40 a.m. But how did someone get a hold of his cell phone between 3:30 and 5:40 a.m.? The fact that his bank card was also missing argues against Jack having been robbed. However, it was never used. No one tried to withdraw money or make a purchase with it. Furthermore, there are no witnesses who have come forward and claimed to have seen a robbery or an argument that night. None of the party guests with whom Jack was out on the evening of March 2nd have ever spoken publicly about his disappearance. His mother, Catherine, continues to try to bring the case of Jack O'Sullivan to the media and fights for her son to be found. And for that, we can only wish her and Jack's other relatives all the best. And that was our case today. But first of all, I would of course be interested to hear your theories about the Jack O'Sullivan case. How do you explain the connection between the many different clues? Do you think that Jack really had an accident and fell into the water? Or do you think it's more plausible that the 23-year-old was the victim of a crime? I'm looking forward to your theories and suspicions. By the way, a comment is the best way to support Insolito. A like also helps each video a lot, because every interaction increases the likelihood that the video will be suggested to people who have not yet subscribed to Insolito. Otherwise, I thank you for everything and wish you a good morning, noon, or evening, or whenever you watch the video, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao guys.